As one of the most iconic types of military vehicles, tanks are intertwined with the image of war itself. Born during the brutal trench warfare of World War I, tanks rose to prominence as armored beasts, capable of destroying armored vehicles and fortifications, while being protected by increasingly advanced armor themselves. By the time World War II ended, tanks had evolved into the premier force of any ground army, with many variations serving increasingly specific roles, some logical, others strange. Here is the list of 10 strangest tanks ever made. Number 10, TOS-1 Bertino. A multiple launch rocket system, MLRS. The TOS-1 Bertino is a T-72 main battle tank that ditches the cannon-equipped turret for a box filled with long-range, lethal rockets. While a T-72 tank is terrifying to face in close-range battles, the TOS-1 strikes terror from afar. Equipped with a salvo of 220mm thermobaric rockets, the TOS-1 can carry up to 30 of them, fire them all within 6 seconds, and hit targets up to 1.7 miles away. As terrifying a machine as the TOS-1 is, it also is a weird-looking one. With the rockets carried in a box that replaces the standard T-72 turret, the TOS-1 looks uniquely strange, mixing the boxy style of long-range artillery platforms with a rugged main battle tank. Number 9, Object 279. Looking like a UFO that was captured and mounted to tank tracks, the Object 279 was one of the single weirdest tanks ever made by the USSR, both in purpose and looks. First built in 1967, only a single prototype of the Object 279 was made, intended to be a heavy assault tank that could tackle the most difficult terrains possible while breaking through enemy fortifications. But that's not the weirdest part of Object 279. With its flying saucer-looking hull, made from solid steel armor up to nearly a foot thick, the Object 279 was designed to bounce any incoming tank rounds, and resist the blast wave from a nuclear bomb. No surprise that a tank designed to survive the ultimate weapon ended up looking so weird. Number 8, STRV-103. The Stridsvagn 103, also known as the S-Tank, is a Swedish post-World War II main battle tank, designed and manufactured in Sweden. Developed in the 1950s, it was the first main battle tank to use a turbine engine and the only mass-produced tank since World War II to dispense with a turret. It has an unconventional design with a unique gun-laying process. It is turretless with a fixed gun traversed by engaging the tracks and elevated by adjusting the hull suspension. The result was a very low-profile design with an emphasis on survivability and heightened crew protection level. STRV-103s formed a major portion of the Swedish armored forces from the 1960s to the 1990s, when, along with the Centurions, it was replaced by the Leopard 2 variants Stridsvagn 121 and Stridsvagn 122. While most turretless armored fighting vehicles are classified as assault guns or tank destroyers, the STRV-103 is considered a tank since its designated combat role matched those of other tanks within contemporary Swedish doctrine. Number 7, STRV-74. At first glance, there's nothing too weird about the STRV-74, but look again at the proportions, especially the width, and the STRV-74 begins to look like a normal tank that was photoshopped to be far thinner than it really is. Built in response to an outdated tank arsenal, Sweden began work on developing a new and modern tank after World War II, thus bringing the STRV-74 to life and into service during 1957, with 225 built by production's end. Retired in 1984. The STRV-74 was a solid medium tank. However, it's hard to take the STRV-74 seriously based on looks alone. The overall design is very conventional, looking like many other tanks of the time from the side. Yet at an angle or from the front, the STRV-74's design is weirdly tall and narrow, giving it an almost cartoonish look. Number 6, VT-11. an experimental series of German tanks. The VT series had several strange designs that were based on an abandoned tank project between Germany and America. Using the chassis of the experimental MBT-70, without a turret, the VT tanks were intended as advanced tank destroyers that could counter the evolving Soviet main battle tanks of the early 70s. Using two 105mm cannons mounted to the hull, the VT-11 was the first of the VT tanks, with its prototype being completed in 1974. Proving irrelevant when a Leopard 2 tank entered service, the VT-11, and all the other VT prototypes, never made it to production. Number 5, M50 Pontos. Pontos, officially the rifle, multiple 106mm, self-propelled, M50, was a U.S. light armored tracked anti-tank vehicle developed in the 1950s. It mounted six 106mm manually loaded M40 recoilless rifles as its main armament, which could be fired in rapid succession against single targets to guarantee a kill. Although the actual caliber of the main guns was 105mm, it was designated 106mm to prevent confusion with the ammunition for the 105mm M27 recoilless rifle, which the M40 replaced. It was produced in limited numbers for the U.S. Marines after the U.S. Army cancelled the project. The Marines consistently reported excellent results when they used the Pontos for direct fire support against infantry in numerous battles and operations during the Vietnam War. The American stock of Pontos was largely expended towards the end of the conflict, and the Pontos was removed from service in 1969. Number 4, HSSTL. Standing for High Survivability Test Vehicle, Light. The HSSTL was designed, fairly self-explanatorily, as a light and fast tank that could survive as much hardship as possible. First built in 1980, the HSSTL prototype was fast, with a top speed of around 60 miles per hour, an advanced cannon that fired hypervelocity shells in rapid 3-round bursts, as well as lightweight armor that made the HSSTL ideal for transporting in the back of a C-130 cargo plane. While the HSSTL never made it to production, it remains a unique oddity of tank development, with a cannon that looks like a hydraulic crane arm, and a weirdly angled hull. Number 3, M3 Lee. An American beast of World War II, the M3 Lee was a rush job of a tank, but one that saw plenty of use during the war with its assortment of firepower. Developed from the unsuccessful M2 medium tank, the M3 Lee came about when World War II broke out in 1939. With mostly outdated tanks, and design methods reliant on lessons learned from World War I, the M3 Lee was a stopgap, letting the USA catch up, with the later M4 Sherman seeing far greater success and prolific use. Using a 37mm cannon mounted on the top turret, and a 75mm one on the side, the M3 Lee was heavily armed and armored but was incredibly odd in its design. Number 2, T28 Super Heavy tank. Developed at the end of World War II as a way to completely outclass the monstrous German heavy tanks like the Tiger II, the T28 was a rolling bunker with a massive cannon. First built in 1945, intentions were for the heavily armored, 95-ton monster to act as a spearhead and break through German defenses. However, that same year the war ended, so did plans for the Steel Beast's production. Two prototypes were built and proved to be invulnerable to most tank rounds while having a cannon that could annihilate any tank that tried to fight it. While the power of the T28 is immense, so are the quirks of its design. With two sets of tracks on each side and a massive bunker-like hull, the T28 looks more like a land-based battleship than a tank. Number 1 Bob Semple tank. During WI, New Zealand may not have been much of a player during the conflict, but their government felt that a Japanese invasion of the island nation was imminent and that a lack of tank force would leave them helpless. Acting as the Minister of War for New Zealand during World War II, Bob Semple set out to develop a homegrown tank that could defend the island. In reality, the creation developed from his plan would have done very little to prevent a full-scale invasion. Not much more than an armored tractor, the Bob Semple tank was as strange-looking as it was awful. Using relatively thin corrugated steel, and guns that wouldn't have done much against real tanks, the Bob Semple tank went down in history as both the weirdest-looking, and worst tank of all time. If you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you like, share and subscribe to our channel for more amazing and informative videos.